World Overshoot Day, which is the day that we use up more resources than the world can replenish. After that day, we're actually borrowing or stealing, might be a better word, from future generations.
Polman fue presidente de Unilever, una multinacional gigantesca, durante 10 años. Y ahora se ha convertido en el líder de la resistencia medioambientalista corporativa contra el cambio climático. Aquí nos explica qué están haciendo las mejores empresas para frenarlo y qué hace él para incentivarlas.
We have discovered now more than ever that we can't have infinite growth on a finite planet, and anything we can do forever is by definition unsustainable. If you look at the last few decades since World War II, which is now very transparent, population is 3 times higher than what we had then. So an enormous growth of population, but with that also an enormous consumption growth. We are now consuming 4 times more per capita than we were before. And that's only still done by a relatively small group of the world's population. But that has put an enormous pressure on the planetary boundaries. You know, July 29th last year was what they call World Overshoot Day, which is the day that we use up more resources than the world can replenish. After that day, we're actually borrowing or stealing, might be a better word, from future generations.
Si algunas empresas están cambiando su gestión para frenar el cambio climático, ¿cómo lo han hecho? ¿Qué empresas son las mejores en esto? ¿Y qué espera que hagan?
We now see increasingly more of the world's assets under management being committed to net zero emission targets, $57 trillion. We see more and more companies signing up to the principles of responsible investment. The financial market now also understands that in order to be successful with long-term investments, in order to have a longer-term return on the pensions, but also that it's important to create a world where the pensioners can retire in. And they are seeing that as they seek these better returns, it is increasingly clear that companies that more aggressively attack climate change or their carbon emissions, that have stronger relationships with their employees or communities, more resilience in their value chain, these companies are better placed to get these longer-term returns.
Si las grandes multinacionales, muchas de ellas, no están haciendo nada por frenar el cambio climático, ¿somos nosotros los que pagamos sus ganancias, sus beneficios?
The continuous dependence on fossil fuel and the global warming, the warming of the oceans, the melting of the ice caps, we are close, if not past, in many cases, what we would call tipping points, where the Amazon is starting to emit emissions, where the borealis forest with the burning or the melting of the ice caps and the permafrost actually releases more methane. Where you see heat in India, when it gets 45, 50 degrees, you're talking about the Barcelona heat. But the heat in India, where birds are literally falling out of the sky, where people need to put on more air conditioners, which in turn results into more global warming. So these are negative feedback loops that we're starting to see. And business pays the highest price for that. They see immediately the effects in the P&L. That's why 95% of the businesses now say, we need to take faster action on climate change. We need to internalize the science-based targets for nature. We need to have legislation to move us faster. Now, the good thing is, because we're at a point that the cost of not acting is actually higher than the cost of acting, it is becoming an incredible business opportunity. We are now seeing sector by sector by sector that companies that are better placed for this greener, more equitable, more inclusive future are also higher valued in general by the financial market.
¿Cómo empezaría a actuar de forma efectiva en su ámbito, en el empresarial, para frenar el cambio climático?
I was with Simon Perez and he was in his 90s, and I was always interested to see why people like Desmond Tutu, Nelson Mandela, Simon Perez, or even Mick Jagger or Richard Branson, why do they appeal to all the generations? And he gave me a very astute answer on age. He said, You know, if the list of things you have to do is longer than the list of things you have done, you stay young.
Usted dice que hacen falta líderes empresariales contra el cambio climático, y eso implica que sean empresarios no solo preocupados por ganar dinero, sino por liderar la sociedad en su conjunto. ¿Qué está fallando? ¿Por qué no tenemos esos líderes?
On politics, it is very important that we have seen since COVID that in over 100 countries, democracy has gone down. We see the challenges of multilateralism. We see increasingly in governments in the countries being populist, nationalist, or xenophobic. And that's exactly because we are not addressing these basic issues. So people are becoming increasingly desperate and looking for alternatives to the conventional political model. And that's why you see these extremes being elected in many of the countries. So my philosophy has always been business for a long time benefited from functioning governments. Now that the political system is a little bit under pressure and more difficult, it is the obligation for business, responsible business, to fill that void and help de-risk the political process. So companies that have made bold decisions to withdraw their business from Russia should be applauded. They should not, companies that are speaking out when there are issues of Roe versus Wade in the US, Wade versus in terms of personal freedoms for women. So increasingly CEOs have to become societal leaders as much as business leaders. And the society demands that. The trust in business is high, higher than in governments, and people will not work anymore for companies that don't work on this broader improvement of society and the defense of these basic human values on which humanity is based. Dignity and respect, equity, compassion. We should continue to take a responsibility of ensuring that they are safeguarded. Because if they are eroded, you erode humanity over time, and it would become a sad world. We cannot let that happen. So it's all about the responsibility of de-risking the political process.